Hello, I'm Liz Homer. I'm the curator of the Turner Dodge House. Welcome to our Meet Your City program. We're in our 5th year now. And this evening we're going to be talking about Italian Americans who came to Lansing in the 1880s. That would be about 4 decades after the Turners came here. They were the earliest pioneers here. When they came, there were about 200 or 300 people living in this area. And gradually, as we grew, people from other countries and other parts of the United States came to Lansing. And so tonight we're lucky to have Charlie Spagnuolo and Julane here, who have done some wonderful research on their heritage in the Lansing area, and they're here to share it with you. And not only is the history itself very interesting, but the way they accomplished this is very interesting too. So enjoy the evening and come and visit the Turner Dodge House as soon as you can.
Thank you, Liz. We're going to start out talking about the first families that came into Lansing. We think that Gaetano di Rose was the first Italian to settle and start a business here in Lansing. We found him in the 1891 city directory. The second one that came in is Polato Spagnuolo, and we found him in the 1892 directory. We think it's fairly unusual that we're able to find the core of an ethnic group that's then eventually brought in the other people into the community. It's what is called chain migration, where you start with 1 or 2 couples, and then they will send for a brother or the wife, sister, or whatever, and bringing in the other people. Now, we have found that most of the early Italians in Lansing came from the province of Calabria, and specifically Cosenza and Sant'Ippolito.
Julane, you might mention also that the two, Gaetano and Ippolito, Ippolito was your great-grandfather and mine, and Gaetano was my great-grandfather. This is the map of Italy, and the Calabria area is right down here by the toes, just above the toe, this being the Calabria area, and Cosenza is right up in here, and Sant'Ippolito is right just outside the city of Cosenza.
We think it's interesting the way that one town almost emptied in Italy, and they all came to Lansing. In fact, sometimes you can't find Sant'Ippolito on the map, and the joke is that, well, they're all over here. I think another thing that is important is how they brought the tradition of Sant'Ippolito here. And Charlie, you have a lot of information about that.
On Sant'Ippolito?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Okay, this is a 50-year invitation that we made up in 1968, I think it was, or 86. And this is the history of Sant'Ippolito, how it became the name of Sant'Ippolito. Back in the year 258 AD, the city, Ippolito was a Roman soldier in that area. And St. Lawrence was a Christian, and when the emperor found out about it, Emperor of Rome found out about it, he ordered him to give up his Christianity, and he refused. So what they had him roasted alive on a gridiron skillet. So then he found out that Ippolito, while he was in prison, Ippolito was the Roman soldier in charge of him. Well, he wasted no time, St. Lawrence, in converting Sant'Ippolito or Ippolito into a Christian, him and all of his family. So when the emperor found out about this, he threw them all in prison. He ordered them to give up their Christianity, in which they chose to have death instead of giving it up. And they were all pulled apart alive by wild horses. And that's how he became martyred. Then the city of San Polato used to be known as Napoli Piccolo, which is Little Italy, or excuse me, Little Naples, because it resembled so much the city of Naples. Well, in the late part of the 18th century, there was an extreme earthquake that destroyed all of the prominent buildings in San Polato and destroyed 1/3 of the population. Well, there was only one building that wasn't destroyed, and it was the church named San Polato. So the people seeing this decided that they wanted to change the city's name to San Polato in honor of the saint, and vowed to annually have a fiesta for that time period, or every year. And then in Lansing, the people that came over from San Polato, they decided they wanted to continue on with this celebration. So in 1938, or probably a little bit prior to 38, they all got together and decided, they raised funds, they sent about 6 people to Chicago and ordered a statue of San Polato, which was full size, life size, and we used that statue after the Mass and in a procession. And then, because of the way that San Polato was martyred, they decided that they wanted to order another statue, which was a bust from waist up. And that statue is still used today. Now, we celebrate the Feast of San Polato on the second Sunday in August, and that continues on today with the same statue, and it normally starts with the Mass with the bishop, and then after the Mass there is a procession led by the banners of different saints, and they lead them out around the front of the church and around to the center of the grounds, and leave the statue there. And then in honor of the saint, people come up and pin money on the statue, and that money goes towards trying to help carry on this fiesta and everything. But these are just different ones. This one here, tall one, happens to be the first statue, which is at Resurrection Church today. And it's still there, but we don't use it. We leave it there.
So Charlie, the festival is on the second Sunday in August in Lansing, but also in San Polato.
Yeah, and I'm
Same
sorry,
kind of festivals.
it's not in Lansing. Actually, the group got together and decided that they wanted to have it at, it was in Bunker Hill at Cornelius Cyprian Catholic Church on Catholic Church Road. And we've had it there every year except for 2 years during the war. They had it at Resurrection because of the gas prices and problems of getting around.
I think we all have the question of what brought the immigrants to America. First of all, the economic conditions in Italy were just outrageous. And it wasn't just a depression, it was a poverty that they saw no way of escaping. And they had been told, of course, that in America the streets were paved with gold. And that was enough to make them want to come to America for a better life. The immigration peak was between 1880 and the 1930s. During that time period, 4.5 million Italians came to America. And the surprising thing to me is that actually cut the population of Italy to 1/3. It was so bad, in fact, that Italy tried to stop the flow of people leaving Italy. At the same time, on this side, Congress continually tried to find ways to stop immigration. Various legislation was passed Sometimes it addressed a quota system. Sometimes it was literacy tests they tried. They wanted each immigrant to be able to read 40 words in either language, which was difficult. At least half of the Italians at that time were illiterate. Most of them came in at Ellis Island, but it was also known as the Island of Tears. When they docked in the United States at Ellis Island, they had to go through stringent medical examinations. There was some disease with the eyes that they would be checked for. And if you were found sick, they could deport you back. So if you think about that, you could arrive in this country at Ellis Island with a family member sick, then you would have to decide, do you all go back? Do some of you go back? Or whatever. And it had a tendency to split families. In other cases, entire boats were turned back. If there were cholera or something contagious on the boat, then they would all be sent back. So even just making the 2 or 3 week voyage was only part of the trip. Then they had to get through Ellis Island. This is one of my favorite pictures. I think it exemplifies a mother's dilemma here. This is Maria Feda. That's her passport picture. So 5 children, small children, coming across the ocean to meet Angelo Feda, who was her husband. So imagine all the things that I just mentioned about the sickness and the possibility of them being turned back. So she's trying to make sure that 5 kids stay healthy while the 2 week trip probably in unpleasant conditions. And when they got here, the boat was detained for 2 more weeks because Congress was in this period where they were trying to send the boats back. So eventually she got to Lansing and met up with her husband. So we know why many of them came to America, but why did they come to Lansing? We're not sure. We have no information about Gaetano de Rose, how he got here or why he chose Lansing. But at Polato, we may have a little bit of information about him. This would be my father's grandfather. So he remembers a story. Originally, Polato came to America in 1880, and he first went to St. Louis, Missouri, and he was there until he came to Lansing. In St. Louis, my father remembers that the story was a cigar salesman from Lansing had gone to their business there in St. Louis, Missouri, and mentioned that there was this little town in Michigan that looked like it was a good business opportunity. So we thought that story was interesting, but then as we got into some of our genealogy, one of our more recent projects, we found out that Lansing was in fact a center for cigar manufacturing. Then the story seemed to have more validity. So we think possibly that was why Polato got here. But it took incredible courage and faith for these people to leave their homeland. When they left Italy, they were pretty sure they would never see their parents again, maybe not their brothers and sisters. So I don't think any of us can really appreciate the courage it must have taken to come to this country. But whatever how they got here originally, there is clear that it was the chain migration, bringing over a relative or a friend, that really built the community. Here's an interesting picture.
The other part of that is that Polato went to St. Louis, Missouri because George Spagnuolo was in Fowlerville and his sister was in St. Louis, Missouri. So they go to family, and families will set them up until they are on their own. And
And that may have added to that encouragement to come here. I find this wedding picture just fascinating. Clearly you can tell who the bride and groom is, and there's people standing on either side that would indicate they were wedding party, and we think perhaps the ones on the end are dressed for the wedding party. But have you ever seen a wedding picture with a dozen men in the background? I mean, I just think that's very interesting. But it may have something to do with this chain migration. It may be that those were family members that meant something to the bride and groom that were here in Lansing, and they all ended up in the picture. But I think it does give a good sense of community and the way that the Italians were grouping together, because I don't think I've ever seen a wedding picture like that. Now, history that had an impact on what happened to the Italian Americans here. During World War I, there's an interesting story. Giuseppe Caruso was here in Lansing and had sent passage money to his two sons in San Polato. But this was about 1918 and the First World War was going to start, so he decided he should get back to his family. So he went back to San Polato, not knowing that the boys had already left Italy and were coming to Lansing. Somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, the two ships crossed. So the boys ended up here in Lansing, actually in Owasso with relatives, and then they had to wait till the war to end so that the father then could come back. Another thing that was interesting is that in World War I, since Italy and the U.S. were on the same sides in that war, if you fought in the United States Army, then you were granted citizenship. And not only for yourself, but for all the family. So men were willing to go into the service as a way to get citizenship for all their families. World War II was a different situation. I had Mussolini on one side, we're on the other side. You have to think that families, in some instances, part of the family stayed in Italy, part of the family would be here. So you could have brother in Mussolini's army and a brother here in the American army. So that set up a different kind of situation. But over 500,000 Italian Americans served in the U.S. Army in World War II. Charlie, you have a book there that we have found fascinating. Tell a little bit about the Savoy Club.
The Savoy Club started in 1927, I think it was. And this happens to be the 13th annual meeting that they had, and they're members of the club. You had something you wanted to
Yes. What I wanted to show is actually, because of kind of an interest in history, I went to covers about 50 years, but I wanted to see what happened at the time of Pearl Harbor. So I went to December 41, and what I found was a typical December meeting. This was on December 2nd, and this is the election of officers for the next year. So I thought, well, maybe then there's something about Pearl Harbor in January. This is the January meeting. What I found here was an entry. They had a meeting on the 21st of December, 1941, 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. This is, of course, in Italian, but it says that the president called the meeting to order. Brother Pasquale Verderes made a proposal to send $200 to the USA Defense Fund and $25 to the American Red Cross. And the vote was 100 to 100. And with nothing more to discuss, the meeting was adjourned. So I think that was a very interesting piece of information, because in many cases, by the 40s, still we had people that were not citizens yet in that group of men. And at the same time, some of them had draft-age sons born in this country, so that they knew that some of their boys would be going into the World War II.
What does Savoy mean?
Savoy, I don't know for sure.
A person's name and place?
I often wondered, but I do not know the answer to that. But I think this is an example of the patriotism that the Italian Americans had for their new homeland.
the Savoy Club lasted up until I think it was 1952, and then in 1945 they started the Italian American Club, because this was just sort of non-existent at that time, although they still had their meetings. Then that broke up several times, and now the Italian American Club has been going since 1973 and been going pretty strong. They also have a Calabrese Club in the city of Lansing as well.
We think that the Italians also, the Italian Americans, contributed to the growth of Lansing. One of the things that Charlie and I noticed in the city directories as we were going through them, you could see that a person would have a business in maybe the 100 block of East Michigan Avenue. And then if you looked a couple more directories later, you would find maybe 4 or 5 people at that same address. And then a couple books later, you would find somebody in that group had opened a store, maybe in the 600 block. And as we have been looking at this, it appears to us that the stores were following the spread of Lansing. They would go down South Washington, down North Washington, down East Michigan, over to Franklin, which is Grand River now. And you can actually see how the city is sprawling out just by watching the businesses. So Charlie, you got some pictures there.
Yeah,
These are wonderful old stores.
This is an old picture of Emil DeMarco's on Michigan Avenue, and in fact, all 3 of these are Emil DeMarco. Now, I can't swear that all 3 of these were in the same store or not. I just, they're all marked with Emil DeMarco on the back. I have no dates to them. I would love to find out dates on it, but that's what we have on Emil DeMarco.
But we believe that it is still the same store, the one that's on
Michigan
Avenue, Emil's.
As well, we have, this is Mike Fabiano on Michigan Avenue. I think that building is the old Max Tavern on Michigan Avenue, just before you get into the double part of the highway, Michigan Avenue, it heads to East Lansing.
But that is Fabiano Candy
Fabiano
store.
Candy, yes. This is George Cascarelli. Now that's not, I'm quite sure that's probably his grandfather or great-grandfather. Cascarelli's on Cedar Street. This is another was Michigan Fruit Company on North Large Street, 311 North Large. This was a truck order that they had back in the 30s. At that time, it was the largest truck order that anybody had ever purchased. And those were delivery trucks for fruit and vegetables around the state of Michigan.
We think that picture's about 1930, but that is the result of the business that Polato started. He first had a store on Michigan Avenue, 100 block, then the 621 building was the next door, and then this one on Large, Michigan Fruit on Large.
They also had a Spagnuolo company on South Street.
Right.
Which was a warehouse, same thing. That was in business up until 1949, when my father, Paul Spagnuolo, bought the business with 2 silent partners, and it became then the Spear Distributing Company, distributing Stroh's beer. And that building is now center field for the Lugnuts.
But the interesting thing here on this one, I think, is to show the difference of the timing. Since Polato came in the 1890s, and most of the other Italian immigrants came from the 1900s and 1930s, they'd already been here 1 generation. So they were moved into the wholesale side while the others had just the retail. One other thing about the stores is that everybody lived over the store.
Yeah, we did.
And I think that is one of the primary reasons why you don't find a Little Italy here in Lansing, You know, in the big cities, San Francisco, New York, Boston, they clustered together. But I think because they lived over the stores and the stores kept moving out as Lansing spread, those Italians came into the neighborhoods and did not congregate together. There is also the problem of the language barrier when they first got here. And it was difficult for them to go into a situation where they needed to take instructions from someone because of the language. And actually, many of them found it was easier to start their own business. The language wasn't a problem when they were in their own business. Also, many of them went into produce, but they also, some of them brought trades. The shoemaker, tailors, restaurant owners, tile, yeah, what do you call them, handymen to lay the tile. So I think that also added to Lansing because they were doing different things, and that allowed them to move into the community.
Julane, Shiawassee and Larch, there's a vacant lot right beside a nice old home. That corner itself used to have a store there, and it was 3 stories high. It housed 3 families in it, along with a Spags market downstairs. And then behind the market was also a tailor shop and a cleaners. And the Cascarelli family, Joe Cascarelli, they had the tailor shop. They closed in somewhere in the 30s and moved out to California. But at one time there was 3 Spags grocery stores throughout the town. One was next to the old bus stop on South Washington. Another one was on Mount Hope and St. Joe. And there was another one on Saginaw, and just 2 stores over from Pine Street, west of Pine Street. Mm-hmm. So they had these grocery stores set up all around the place. Aunt Maggie set up a grocery store in Owasso, Michigan. They spread out all over, and the Michigan Fruit Company was the one that basically established them in business and then delivered to them.
We also found, we find a better life? When our ancestors came over, did they find what they were looking for? And it's very evident that they did. There's one story of a barber in Lansing, and they had saved to buy a house. They moved into the house. The daughter got married. They gave the house to the daughter, moved back over the store, saved up enough money for another house, moved into that house. When the second daughter got married, they gave her the house, moved back into the store. That, to me, typifies their concept of a better life, is they would do anything for their children. And that's still a custom among Italians now, is each generation cares for the generation coming up. I think also that they had a sense of hard work. Because everybody lived over the store, everybody worked in the store. So from the very beginning, they learned that they had to work together. They also valued education. There's a story in our book of memories of Nina Sidoti. She wanted to learn to read and write English so badly that she took a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old to night school with her so she could learn the language. And she had to walk a half a mile to get to the streetcar, ride the streetcar downtown, and then on the way back, of course, the little one would fall asleep and she actually would end up carrying the child home. But that's a determination to learn the language. I think also that they value the freedom of choice. Italians go to the polls. They vote. They find that as being a very important part of having come to this country, is that they can be a part of the freedom of choice. I think also that the Italians, if you look at the culture they brought, the language, art, music, love of good food and wine, conversation, they love to have a party, and they have that risk-taking spirit of Christopher Columbus. So I think the Italians have contributed quite a bit to the growth of Lansing and have enriched Lansing with their heritage for the past 110 years.
Quite a few of the buildings on Michigan Avenue were built by Polato, Spagnuolo, and over on Saginaw. There's numerous buildings all over the city that had his mark on it. I can't name them, but I know of several of them.
There are 3 websites we'd like to bring to everyone's attention. Well, first of all, let's start. Charlie, show me a book.
That's the Book of Memories. Starting back in about 1998, we sent out over 600 letters to Italians all around the state of Michigan, mainly in the city of Lansing. And we had response of 83 people. What we were asking for was a little information of how they came from Italy to Lansing, what they went through, what it was like, and everything else. So in 80 stories, we finally sat down, Julane and myself, and we put them together and put them into the book. All we did was compile them and put them in. We did not write them. In fact, I was too busy typing other people's and I never got my own story in there. So, but it has 80 stories along with pictures, and we had over 400 copies printed, and they sold out completely. And then they had an extra 100 that we ended up getting from them, and those sold out completely. Now they're talking about wanting to do another book.
But you can find the book in the Capillary District Library, in the State of Michigan Genealogy section, and it's also in the Smithsonian American Histories.
Great.
And also in Minnesota's, University of Minnesota's library. They have a very large ethnic library there.
The 3 websites that I had mentioned, one was done by the grant through the Michigan Humanities Council, is the Italian American Heritage website, and there's information in there. You have the ability to go in and put a surname in and locate that person. That database only has the deceased members, and so it's primarily an immigrant database. We also have a connection, a link on the Lansing Regional Sister Cities Commission website. Cosenza is a friendship city to Lansing, and so we worked with them. We have information and stories about Cosenza and Italy on that website. And then we have 2 women that are doing just this wonderful activity, Jane Fabiano Turner and Michelle Hicks. They have developed a website, and it's a genealogy website. They are going through the old handwritten records, microfilms, of the people in Santa Polato and Cosenza. And they are able then to track your family back through the old country, which we've never been able to do before. Just this past week, they found 2 siblings of my grandmother I didn't even know existed. So they're doing a wonderful job there.
You also have the Italian American Club website on that site, along with the Order of Sons of Italy as well.
So we've linked the sites as much as possible, so if you get to one, you can find the other. But I think that's our story. We've really enjoyed having an opportunity to talk about the Italians in Lansing. We think it's a pretty interesting background. I hope you do too. Thank you.